Boilermaker fans, this is your host, the Big Time Boiler, coming at you with a new audio-only podcast. It's been a while, and I think we're overdue for some positive Purdue football talk. There's a lot of negative talk out there here lately. This is a beautiful June day today. This is my favorite kind of time of year. Summer's in session. The preview magazines are coming out. The new football game is going to drop here pretty soon. And, you know, we're getting hyped up for college football. Less than, I think, 90 days or so. This is the kind of the time where everybody's, the players are back on campus. Things are, we're getting ready. We're getting close to football. So, figure it's time for a video. Time to talk a little bit more positive than probably you're hearing about Purdue from the media, maybe your friends, whatever, right? And I really don't blame those people because Purdue football, honestly, has been horrible the last few years. So I just wanted to do a real quick synopsis of how we got here. I'll try to be brief and just kind of maybe inject a little more positive thoughts of why it might be a little bit different this year. So let's take a quick step back to a few years ago. Things were going pretty good with Jeff Brom. We make the Big Ten championship game. He obviously leaves for Louisville, his alma mater. We get our butts kicked by LSU, which is not a surprise. Guys like AOC and George and David Bell sat out. So that's kind of and then we hired Ryan Walters, which at the time I was surprised, but kind of drank the Kool-Aid as a fan. I'm like, it might be able to work. He's young, can relate to players. He's a defensive guru. He's going to recruit. It's going to go great, right? And then first year was okay. Won 4 games, should have won Fresno State game. I think there was actually then lost some players like Nick Scorton and Deion Burks, but he went after a lot of not potential. He went after a lot of potential, not production. A lot of former high 4-star type players in the transfer portal. Things just did not go good in year 2 with a lot of talent, honestly, or not a lot of talent, but they had guys like Dylan Thieneman, first-round draft pick, Will Helt. They had Max Clare. They had multiple draft picks on that team and they won 1 game, which to me is inexcusable. One of the worst coaching jobs ever seen at Purdue with the talent they had. And I think Ryan Walters, kind of forgiving him. He's a young guy. I think he's my age. Basically, he made a mistake. And shame on Mike Binsky. He should have hired more of a mature, at the very least, someone like a Jerry Kill, assistant head coach, that could help Ryan navigate the waters of being a head coach, especially in this crazy time of college football. Ryan made some mistakes. He didn't have like a number 2 there that should have been again a Jerry Kill type assistant coach. Year 2 was a total train wreck with some talent on the team, just inexcusable. So, needless to say, Ryan gets fired, which was the right choice. And year 2 was such. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but year 2 was such in the Ryan Wall. It was such a bizarre year. Purdue played decently in year 1. Here's your typical kind of year 1 change over the program mold, because they beat the crap out of IU, or not the crap out. They beat IU, got Tom Allen fired. They did beat the crap out of Minnesota, Illinois at home. They spanked them, both those teams. Kind of pure programs. They smoked them, and they won at Virginia Tech. They blew the Fresno State game. They should have won that game. So that was a 5-6 win team. And you coming into year 2, you thought it'd be okay. They would be at least around the same record, and then the wheels just fell off. So that's all the time spent on that. Anyway, so then with Purdue hires Barry Odom, which I was happy with the hire. Here comes Barry Odom. Poor Barry, walks into the first team meeting with 20-plus players in the room. And not exactly 20 studs. All the studs that were on that team, they all left. To teams like Oregon, Ohio State, Clemson. Not exactly bottom-of-the-barrel programs here. There was some talent. Texas. These... Anyway, so yeah, Purdue loses pretty much all its talent. Even a guy like Ryan Brown, who ends up being their quarterback, he leaves for UNC for a spring semester and comes back eventually, but still. So Barry had he did not have a good situation last year. Had to bring in 83 new players, which is absurd. 83 by far was the most in college football. Not only that, half those guys, I think like 40 plus players, did not show up until June of last year. Like at the earliest. And I think some guys even came in July. So that means Barry had basically that whole team together for a total of 2.5 months before the first game. That is not a recipe for success. They brought in like 30 plus in the winter. They lost some of those guys and also more guys in the spring. And then they brought in another 32 for that spring class that didn't come into the summer. So that is a tough situation to ask. One good thing already for this year is the spring portal was canceled. They got rid of it. Only there was one portal class. Purdue only brought in 30, 33, I think if you include JUCO players. And they brought a healthy amount of production and potential. They retained most of their guys. And so outside of like 6 or 7 guys that include freshmen and a couple transfers that didn't actually show up until about last week, they had their whole team of newcomers and returners. They've had them together since January. So that's already a giant upgrade over last year. So by the time the first game comes around, 95% of the team has been together for 9 months, as opposed to 2.5 months from last year. Now, every team has that advantage, but for a program like Purdue, that's a much bigger advantage because they're going through more turmoil and more, roster overhaul. A team like, I don't know, even like a Minnesota, right, where they probably retain most of their guys every now. They lost guys here and there, but the core has been there, right, the whole time. So they're not overturning, 75% of the roster. So this is a huge advantage for Purdue. Barry's been able to coach these guys, even that guy like Ryan Brown, he showed up in June last year. Now, granted, he was there for the previous season, but he's not been around these guys. So now he's been around these guys for over a year, or actually right at a year. And so players like him, even guys they brought in last year in June, guys like Charles Correa, they've only been on campus now for a year. So you see where I'm getting at? So Purdue, they're going to have more chemistry, tighter group of players, togetherness, coached up a little bit more. So this is some positivity for Purdue. So Barry had we won't touch on it. So the 2-0 last year, they start off right. I think most Purdue knowledgeable fans knew that it was going to be a tough year, tough schedule, first of all. And then you knew 83 new players. Let's just be competitive and maybe, get to 4 wins. 6 maybe would be a pipe dream, but if things go right, they stay healthy. Well, things didn't go right. They only win 2 games, the first 2, and they lose 10 in a row. Now, they should have won 2 more. They should have beat Minnesota, who they dominated stats-wise, when they made some absolute back-breaking plays to lose that game. And the same thing with Rutgers. I think that was a closer game, but they had the ball to win the game, and they fumbled it, and they literally fumbled it away. So in my mind, and they played very good at Michigan. So that team was not talented, but they were pretty well coached for the most part, and they should have won at least 4 games. They only won 2. So, and again, a lot of non-Purdue fans aren't going to know this. They're not going to care. They're going to say, I think Athlon came out with their magazine, or at least the preview of it. They got Purdue ranked 18, which most people have Purdue ranked last, but these guys all said Purdue 18th in every position group, which to me is not right. But so why also I think there might be some more positivity for this year. Year 1, again, not great for Barry Odom, not good for Barry Odom. They win 2. That was kind of the floor. They hit the floor, basically, right? They played okay, though. They played better. They punched above their weight a little bit in some games, but they even, played decently against USC, Illinois, Notre Dame. I don't know. Really, the only game that really didn't show up was the Northwestern game, which was disappointing, and then at Washington. And then IU, obviously. But even IU, they played pretty good in the first quarter. But anyway, we digress on last year. We're now looking forward to next year. Why also do I think there's reason for optimism? I think overall, Barry Odom brought in better players this year. He brought in more production. He brought a nice mix of younger talent with production, and then some older guys with production as well. Really, out of those 30 guys, a nice mixture there. I think a guy that kind of encompasses that is a guy like Curtis Neal, right, who's going to replace And I guess even before I get into that, Purdue, for the most part, had a bit better, or they had not a bit better, they had a better retention portal class, or they had a better retention of players in this portal window than they have in the past, right? They kept most of the players they needed to. Now, they did lose some guys. I think, the biggest losses were guys like Harkless, Kennedy, the D tackles, and then I guess like a guy like Nitro Tuggle, wide receiver, and then Joyner the center, and then like Purvis the guard. Now, none of those guys, in my opinion, are like exactly. There's no Deion Burks or Nick Scortons in there, or Dylan Thienemans or Max Clares. Those guys are like, they're replaceable, right? They weren't exactly all-stars. Now, there was talent there, and there was some potential, but also a guy like Nitro Tuggle, I don't know if he was ever going to get it, the full maximum of that potential here. So, not anything back-breaking. And so, like, out of 30 guys, I think they kept, 22 of them. So, or 25 even. So, decent retention rate. So, they kept most of the players they wanted to. That's the first thing. Then they can bring in guys like Curtis Neal. A guy like Curtis Neal has P4 proven production. Started 12 games at Wisconsin 2 years ago. And he started majority of the games for Illinois last year. I mean, that's the kind of guys they got, right? Starter-level players who can replace a guy that you lost and maybe even upgrade. And came from winning programs. And then you have a guy like JoJo Hayden, a linebacker from Illinois. A guy that, again, younger, I think a redshirt sophomore last year, is going to be a junior this year. So 2 years of eligibility left. Played very good against Purdue last year. Hard, heavy hitter. And then another guy. We'll stick with the defense side of the ball. Mangum, the safety, started 6 games for Michigan last year. 2 years ago was like honorable All Big Ten with Michigan State. They brought in those type of players. Mr. Clark, who's going to be a DB nickelback, first team conference USA. They brought in players like that, proven production. Then on the offensive line, they lost a few pieces, but they bring in a guy like Boaz Stanley, who was a starting offensive lineman in South Carolina last year, going to be the center. Before that was Troy. A guy like young talent. There's some young potential with this guy, Nuki Mafi, who was a redshirt freshman last year, started all 12 games for Oklahoma State, who's a P4 program. Now, they were terrible, but big body. So you get a guy that's going to be a redshirt sophomore that has 12 starts to his name. That's pretty good. And then you got 3 years to build with them. And then a couple guys from USC that started a few games, like 5 games last year for USC. Bonellos, you get him. So they brought in some players that, have proven production. So, and I'm not going to name every player. I won't go into that depth right now, but there's some benefit. On the opposite side of the ball, the running back room, let's just pick that room real quick. You bring in a guy like Fami Edgeboy from Minnesota, redshirt freshman, started a couple games last year with Taylor being hurt. 450 yards rushing, a couple touchdowns, had 100, maybe 1 or 2 100-yard games. Extremely talented. Coaches are raving about him. You bring a guy like Jared Gibson from Texas, who only played 4 games for redshirting last year. I think he played a season before that. Somewhere like 500 career yards rushing. Had a touchdown against Michigan last year. Very highly recruited player. A couple years ago, get a guy like him. Then a guy from the FCS ranks, and Travis Terrell, little jitterbug, Darren Sproles type. Looks like an absolute stud kick returner and punt returner. So you're bringing in these kind of players. The wide receiver room, a guy like Wasim from FAU, 700 yards. A guy like Busy Owens, who's a very good wide receiver at the lower levels. And then a guy like Xavier Townsend, who has had Purdue's before. So there's a lot. I guess where I'm getting at with all this, and let's kind of put a bow on this all, is there's a lot more talent on this team overall, in my opinion. This is a much more complete football team, guys. Much more complete football team. Now, again, I'm not on here saying Purdue's going to win 8, 9, 10, 11 games. That's most likely not going to happen. I think the floor is somewhere around 3 or 4. I mean, well, we're talking floor. Probably floor is, 3. Ceilings, probably, ceiling's a ceiling, right? Ceiling would be like 7. But realistically, I think Purdue's going to be the 4, 5, 6 range. 6 can be if Ryan Brown takes a step up, the talent's as good around him as we think, or I think. And I think the bottom line is I think Purdue's got again, I've said this, but they got a better overall talent level. They don't exactly have a ton of weak spots per se from what they've been in the past. And I think just the bottom line is they're kind of an average Big Ten football team, which to me is a huge improvement of what they've been. There's nothing wrong with that. So what you get with an average Big Ten football team is a ton of 50-50 games or 40% games where it's 40-60. So in those games, little things, injuries, whatever, they can make a big difference of a team winning 4 or 6 games. So I think there's optimism. I think Purdue, with this schedule, not as daunting as it has been in the past, there's definitely there's a way, if you look at it, they can get 6 wins. I'm not saying they're going to, but they should be very competitive in at least 8 or 9 of these games. So we'll do more now on this channel. I think maybe this format, maybe do a little more optimism. It's easier actually doing this recording. Hopefully you enjoyed this. Hopefully maybe your expectation was raised just slightly. Anyway, we'll talk to you soon. God bless. Boiler up, and it's almost football time.